and just want to kind of introduce people to get started. So we've got Travis here, Director of Web Services from Pivot, Jeremy, esteemed President of Pivot, and always with a clever comeback and statement. Monica, who's probably one of the most accurate people I know. I always really trust talking with Monica and getting advice from her. So really good group. Dawn is also in the background, basically behind the magic screen and running everything. So I thought we'd kind of start, if it's okay with you all, with just sort of looking at some things that are out there. Would welcome anyone's comments and thoughts on these. We've had a lot of discussions actually on, are things actually in the spirit of the FCC order or not, right? Which I think is a question. But I thought we'd just start with sort of just looking at some stuff. We'd love people to post questions, things like that as well. So I'm going to start. I'm going to share my screen, show you a couple of things I've seen because the 410 deadline has passed. We're on 411. And then Travis, if you'd like to show some stuff, would love for your thoughts, and we can go over questions. We got some polls. It should be a good session. All right, so let's go take a look at things. So first off, let's go to Verizon, right? Huge company, all kinds of things. So let's go take a look at this. First thing you're going to notice is when you click this View Labels button, it's going to ask for your address. This is something you see across the industry, right? And it's actually agrees with the FCC order that you need to show this in your point of sale system for a service that is available to an address, right? So in this case, I typed in our office address in advance, put this in, and this is actually looking at mobile plans, but I can see 3 mobile plans that are here. And I don't know if you spent much time thinking about mobile and what it looks like in labels, but there is a ton going on in mobile labels. And I'll show you another one here in just a minute. But I mean, look at what you need to represent for download speeds. Everything from 700 meg to 9 meg, right? Could be a typical speed, depending on the actual technology the phone's on in that particular cell. So a real challenge. If you look at another company like that, C-Spire, this is actually one that's using our app, which is really fun for us. So they're using the NTCA CrowdFiber application to create the labels. So these are live and running right now, and you can basically see the different options that they're providing on unlimited plans. If you look at Google, pretty similar in terms of layout, right, to what you see from C-Spire. Again, this is based on an address, right, and qualifying for an address. If you look in the CrowdFiber system now, we've just released new code that lets you be able to show the labels, same kind of thing, right? So it's there and in there. You just go to your product in CrowdFiber, put in the label ID, and it's good to go. And that's, of course, using the application that we have, right, to be able to generate the labels. So different things going on. I think it's really interesting. There's some that are really kind of pushing things, and I'll show you one real fast. Let me pull this one up. I actually had a little challenge getting into it because Comcast shut me off. So it was a little harder to get to. And let me see if I can actually get to it or not. I might not be able to. But at any rate, the Comcast one is really kind of wild because it shows multiple products with a single label. It's kind of like a hotel chain where the hotel door price is much higher than the price that you've actually purchased for the night, right? It's the maximum price. So some interesting stuff going on. Travis, do you have a minute to show us some of the things that you've noticed as well?
Absolutely.
Great.
Good to talk to you. Hopefully most of you again, maybe some of you are joining for the first time. So some of this, one of the, that I'm showing you, maybe something you've seen before, but one of the things we were a little nervous about, I'm not gonna lie, that, the FCC says, hey, here are these things that you need to do. And as we were interpreting what they were putting forth, we were telling ourselves, I don't think that people are going to want a broadband experience like this, right? To where we just say, hey, here's all these labels that are just displayed on the screen in full, because I know many of you likely have more than 4 offerings. Maybe you have fiber and fixed wireless. And so altogether you have 7, 8, 9 plans that you're currently offering. And oh my gosh, how are we going to put this all on the screen? Never mind the fact that many of visitors are using a mobile device. In fact, a majority of your visitors are likely on a mobile device. How are we going to fit this all on one screen? So what we started kicking around were different implementations of that. How can we manage that, make it something so the user experience is not so overwhelming? So we were looking at things like this, having foldables and accordion things to display the labels, or perhaps putting labels in a pop-up environment like this. It's still on the same page, but it is superimposed over the content of the page. But the FCC doesn't say this is how you do it. They just say you have to get it done. And so with the big boys on campus yesterday having to do that, like Bailey said, we're now able to look and see how are other folks handling this. And so this is Xfinity. And the way they're handling this is very interesting. And so as I select a plan, of course, they're giving me the label here. First of all, it's in a scrollable environment, which is interesting. I said, well, how is that going to work in mobile? And it turns out in mobile space here, it actually does work okay. It works pretty good in mobile. But what if I said, hey, I want to compare this. I'm on my mobile device, and I don't know, do I want the 100 or the 150? I don't really have a way to compare these side by side. Never mind the fact, what if I wanted to compare 100 with one of the other offerings further up the line? How do I get to that offering? Well, it turns out I have to scroll this, and I have to go on my mobile device and click this. It's just not a great mobile experience, not going to lie. So I'm not a big fan of the Xfinity implementation, to be honest with you. But we also can see how Spectrum's doing it. Spectrum's doing it pretty close to what we've been recommending, which is, hey, if you want to see a label, you can see an individual label. If you want to see all of them, you can see all of them. So they're using that sort of accordion slide out sort of approach. We've got what Frontier's doing here, which is interesting to me because nowhere on here do I see the words broadband label. I don't see broadband label until I click or tap on more plan details, and then I can see broadband consumer label. Well, I don't know about you, but I would bet you fancy lunch there aren't a whole lot of people that are going to think that the broadband consumer label is in more plan details. But you actually do get the label in a pop-up window here when you're on Frontier. Also took a look at ATT. I think ATT is pretty forthright and honest with it, but they really push the content down the page, right? I think they're banking on the fact that, hey, let's put it on there, but you got to kind of work for it to get down here to see it, because they know, I'm guessing from their analytics, most people aren't scrolling too far as they're going through the shopping experience. So I thought this was kind of interesting. They're using all of this space for this notification box here and forcing the label down here. So just some great validation as far as the things that we've been talking about here at Pivot. I know the things that they've been talking about over at CrowdFiber. What is a good way to approach this? And to see the many of the big boys on the block implementing it in ways that are similar to us, what was made us feel all warm and fuzzy. So that's kind of what I wanted to share as far as the landscape before maybe we dig into some questions.
I'll add to that. I reread the order around website compliance after seeing some of these examples, and I think some of the ones are pretty gray in their compliance and spirit of what the FCC is trying to do to create transparency for consumers. I'll read you something from the order. Consumers should not be forced to navigate a provider's website to find the label or toggle back and forth to compare the advertisement with the label. And it goes on, but a few of those examples Travis showed, you clearly had to toggle. The Xfinity one for sure, and you showed a lot of great ones. I've already lost track of which ones I felt were following the spirit and letter versus gray, which Comcast is the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, it's a great point. And Nikki, I think, asked us in the Q&A too about, is the pop label version okay? right? And I think our most conservative reading of it is that it's really not, right? You need to have this data be adjacent and someone can look at it. The Comcast view that we saw is sort of a hybrid because you are picking up the product and thinking about adding it to your cart, and you can start to look at things there. So maybe that works, but the idea of just having this buried off somewhere else that's not readily available while someone's looking at that product and trying to make a decision, I think is a no-go. And we've tried to lean towards let's just do it the way the FCC has said they really would like to have it. And let's start with that. So that's generally been our approach. What other questions do we have coming in? I see a question about MediaCom. Do we take a look at them? I have not looked at MediaCom yet, and that might be something we could look at here in just a minute. But I have not checked them out yet.
We also have thank you to all of you who submitted questions in advance. So we will make sure we get to those too. So
I was going to mention here, Bailey, while you might be pulling up MediaCom, Jim asked a question here that I'll reiterate to everybody. It says, if our staff needs to read the label to a future customer, do they have to read the contents in their entirety, every word, top to bottom? They can't summarize, question mark. So great question, Jim, on that. And I was just going to share really quickly, give a little backdoor insight into this is the editor version of our training that we're providing. And so the reason why I wanted to show this, Jim, to your specific question is this is kind of what the training element can look like for your team. And listen, this is not your typical kind of pivotized training. I mean, there's so much specifics in here from the FCC that there's a lot of information we got to provide, but also even though how specific it is, it doesn't always say exactly what you have to say. You can look here, the general principles say, provide accurate and complete information, right? So you want to ensure all details on the label are explained clearly and accurately. So that's what it says to do. However, we do say use plain language, but it also says focus on key information. So there may be areas that the customer is talking about or asking about, which those would be the areas I think that you need to say, hey, let me go to the label and we can make sure to share this information with you. And then you could ask the customer, would you mind while we're here, I can go ahead and talk to you about what some of the other areas on the label actually mean. So you need to address specific areas where the customer is asking while you're there. I think trying to go through some of the rest of the label is fine. But this is like a verbal explanation. And then what we also have on here is how do you start the label conversations? So in the training package that we have, it says, hey, here's a way to bring this up in a way to consumers. That may be helpful to your staff. So just wanted to give you a little backdoor insight into what that could look like.
also, I'll say that part of our training includes somebody reading the label at a nice pace, like slower than Jeremy was talking. And that's not to say Jeremy was talking fast, because I myself was keeping up with you, Jeremy, and I'm sure all our friends are. But that to say, a little bit slower pace than Jeremy, read the whole label in a conversational tone, in a spirit of informing the consumer, and it came in well under, I think it was well under 2 minutes. I don't remember exactly what
I think you're right. I think you're right. Phil, hey Phil, how you doing up in Toledo? Says, can a sales rep email or text labels, or do they need to read it? Right. And so basically what the order reads is to say, we do need to try to read that and discuss that while on the phone, but you do also have to offer to send that to a consumer. So that would look like, can I text you a link to where this is on our website? Can I send you an email to the link where this is on our website? And so we are supposed to offer to do that. And of course, those calls are supposedly recorded so that we're documenting that we are offering to do that.
This is great. Lots of stuff's coming in. I'm even debating on, do we go through the Q&A ones first or the chat ones first, right? Lots of things. Let's go back to the Q&A maybe and hit a couple there. First one I think we had was on MediaCom that we needed to answer. And on that one, I would love to get a test address. I pulled it up. We can check it out here online, but I'm looking for a test address. We got another question about in the prior webinar, can we put these labels down on the screen, yet other companies do? What do you think? Again, I think the idea there is it relatively adjacent? Is it something people can look at and compare? Would Travis or Monica, would you all add anything to that one?
FCC says close proximity. So the ones that Bailey was showing, the ones that Travis showed, you know, they were definitely in close proximity because they were right underneath where the plan was. I think you're not hitting the spirit. If you have the plans up here, a whole bunch of information, and then the labels way at the bottom that we require a lot of scrolling, that certainly wouldn't be defined as close proximity, probably in the FCC's eyes.
Yeah, and I think that the proximity is such a dependent thing, right? Close proximity on your desktop environment is going to be much different than close proximity on in the mobile space. And so as your environment changes and becomes more constrained, it's how do you define close proximity? And so I think that as long as I think if it were a question for you to be able to say, hey, we put it within reason there. It's not like we put a bunch of videos and other content in between the labels. We certainly didn't force them to go to another page. Then I think everything I think we saw today was generally close proximity.
Oh, that's good. Next one on the Q&A side talks about cellular and says, if you're a reseller of cellular plans, such as a reseller of Verizon, right, do we still need to make our own labels? That's a great question. What I am seeing so far, and you know, this is early on, is that the providers of the cellular services are working with members to be able to help them with labels. So I would look to your reseller. If you're working with NTCA Mobile, we're working with them on labels, but I would look to your reseller and ask them that. Okay. For the next one in Q&A, how would the process work if our point of sale is through the phone? I noticed that AT&T has a drop-down option for their internet plans. How would we address the broadband label over the phone, especially when customer asks for differences over certain sections? Would the answer simply be to look at our website? What do y'all think?
The FCC is pretty clear that they want you to read the label, and they say, and I quote, in its entirety. Now, if somebody's comparing different labels, you can be literal about that and explain, I'd like to read you the broadband label information, will help you compare. I think it will also be within the spirit to, if you know, per what Jeremy said, if you know the factors that they're looking at speed or whatever it may be, to pull, you know, to have, obviously you have those labels pulled up and you could talk through it with the customer. And then also per what Jeremy said, while not required, it certainly is best practice to then follow up at the close of the sale. Hopefully you have sold them on a plan, you've helped them select the right plan, and then you could offer to follow up with the label of the plan they chose, or even additional labels, because if they decide to, who knows, they may decide to upgrade. So that would be a nice way to follow up via email.
Yeah, good answer. Will the label be required on all print material as well as online?
No, labels are not required on print materials. So in your advertising, if you advertise in the newspaper or digitally or what have you, direct mail, you don't have to have the labels on those advertising pieces. I think I'd like to read the definition of point of sale, because I think we're going to have a lot of questions around these issues. And I think to center us in the language of the FCC will be helpful. So I happen to have that handy. So there are two things the FCC is looking for in determining the point of sale. And that's when you need to talk about labels or show labels. Time and location. So I'll read this from the order. As for time, we define point of sale as the moment a consumer begins to investigate and compare broadband service plans available to them at their location. If you're sending an advertising piece and you're talking about your internet, you're getting them interested to investigate. So, you know, just sending that piece is not a point of sale, because they're going to have to take a call to action, go to your website, call you, or visit you. And that leads me into the second part of point of sale, location. So we define point of sale for location, we define point of sale as both ISP websites, which we've been talking about, and any other channels through which service is sold. So you're not selling through a direct mail piece, right? So that includes ISP owned retail locations, third-party owned retail locations, and over the phone. And those three things are also commonly referred to by the FCC, probably not necessarily by us, as alternative sales channels. So if you hear that word bandied about, it's website and alternative sales channels when the FCC is looking at point of sale. And alternative sales channels are phone, and basically what I call in person, like at a retail store, a reseller store, if you're going door to door, if you're selling at a fair, et cetera, et cetera.
And to Monica's point, this is why we also have included this information as part of the training to say, answer those exact questions. So your staff are going to know what those things are. Everybody that works at these locations will know exactly what's meant by point of sale. She mentioned location, time. So anyway, so again, just reinforcing that we're trying to take the order and make it a little bit more simplified for you and your team to understand, unless you just really love reading FCC documentation.
But to the original question asked, if you want to have printed material in your retail location, you're not required, but you certainly could. If you think having a flyer or brochure with all the labels on it would be a easy way for your consumers and your staff to share that information, have at her. We can help with that too. We can help put those materials together for you. And you could also do it in other ways, having a kiosk available, QR code to scan, there are other ways. Which I think we have a poll question around that. We do have, one of our questions we got was, one of you wanted to know from the rest of you how you plan to handle sharing labels in a retail location. So we've turned that into a poll question so you guys can see from each other what you're thinking about. So Dawn, if you'd pull up that, well, there she goes. So how do you plan to share labels in your retail location? So yeah, people, you got it. Everybody knows how to handle a poll. Good job. All right, it's now a good time, Dawn. What do you think? Tom, you end the poll. You're the poll queen. You end it when you think. Oh, it looks like people have stopped.
By the way, we are not allowed to vote as panelists. Very secure voting system.
Integrity.
All right, so we're sharing results there. It looks like 43% of you are considering a printed flyer or brochure at some point, and or because you could select multiple ones. 7% computer kiosk, 25% the CSR will pull it up on their own screen and share that. 29% with a QR code, and then 37% of you are undecided. If there's anyone out there that has a different way they're thinking about sharing with labels in your retail location, throw it into chat and share that for the benefit of all.
Monica, maybe this is a good time to bring up that the kind of the package that we've created to help everybody with this is about label creation and management, website, and training your team. There may be other things that you guys feel like you need in terms of just project management of all of this. And how do we make, a lot of you just said undecided, and you may say, how do we make that decision about that? So if there are other ways in which we can support like the decision-making process or implementation or management of the entire process, just let us know. We're happy to jump in. Our AEs can jump in and help you guys with that. So just let us know if there are other things that you feel you need some support or direction on that's outside maybe some of the scope of the typical of what we've created for you.
Hey, I got an address to test with MediaCom. Would you all like me to take a look real quick and we can see what their site looks like?
Get your
Sure.
popcorn. Yes.
All right, let's try it. Okay, so let's pull up their site. I have put the test address in. And what strikes you on this, right? When you look at this, you think, well, wait a minute, where's the label, right? That's kind of the first thing you think about. I don't see anything changing here, but there is this. right? So if I click on this, then I get a pop-up. And this has a right scroll. So this has nine labels in it, right? For the 3 products they're displayed. So I don't know what MediaCom's doing here. I'm not sure if they are showing all their labels kind of regardless of the products that are available, or if there's something else going on. But that's the way MediaCom's doing it. I think
Way
we're
to
going
go,
to see
baby.
all.
On the fly, live.
Live on
Yes.
One of the
Exactly right.
questions I see in the general webinar chat that I'm curious to see what the panelists think about this was the archival of labels. Marie Necker, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, asked about indicating, that we need to keep the archive labels for 2 years. Do these need to stay posted on our website, even though the plan is no longer offered, or do we just keep it in our files? And I know the consensus answer is generally it doesn't need to be on your website, but it is curious to think about what do you mean by in our files? I think one of the great things about the CrowdFiber implementation of the label tool is that it's kept within their files. It's kept within the CrowdFiber tool database, and so it's a wonderful set it and forget it sort of experience. But what would that mean to keep it in our own files if we weren't using a CrowdFiber tool?
It's a good question. I mean, the big thing is you need to be able to produce it if the FCC inquires, right? That's kind of the main objective of the archiving. So that'd be the thing to think about.
Well, and that relates to a question somebody submitted when they registered, Bailey, that if you could unpack, and that's, stepping back a bit before we talk about archiving labels is, what should people be using to generate the labels?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, our kind of philosophy in making the application to do this, that's on broadbandconsumerlabels.com, is to basically serve as a single source of truth for your labels. Just as people are kind of highlighting, these labels appear in different places in your organization, right? They may appear on your website, they may appear in your shopping system, they're probably going to appear in your retail environment, right, in different areas. And it's going to be easy as things change to get out of sync. And so the application we created lets you be able to create those labels either one-off or directly from your OSS BSS by importing data into CrowdFiber or into this application, and then be able to call those labels anywhere. So we saw, when the 410 deadline hit, we started seeing tons of traffic come into our label system because those providers' websites are referencing that data and pulling it up, right, and showing it. And that provides kind of that single source of truth. And it keeps all of their different places they show it in sync.
Bailey, could you segue in, because it's tangentially related, and we got a question from somebody registering, and we got questions last week too about, can you elaborate on what file formats are acceptable for the labels and how they need to connect to a machine readable file?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen. We'll look at some stuff. So this is our label application, right? And first off, just to get labels into it, you've got a couple options. You can import via CSV, and if you do that, we're going to give you a template for all the details that you need to do with that. And we also have people who will help you think through this and kind of help you tune your labels. There's actually a lot to the labels. You might think, oh, great, I'll just stick stuff in and be done. Well, that's not really the case. As you go through and think about these, all the time when we're working with members looking at this, we're going to this view, this little preview here, and looking at the layout and looking at what it says and tuning stuff, saying, well, no, we don't want to say exactly that. Right. We want to be shown a different way. And you'd be surprised how often those kinds of discussions come up. So there's a lot in this. Now, to make the label appear, you grab this code, right, and it will appear. And the Pivot team is wonderful at working at this. They have this live in production with providers that are serving over 100,000 subscribers. So it's a tested, proven solution at this stage, proven for 2 days, right? But proven nonetheless. So that's really great. Now we also generate PDFs. So you can go ahead and create a PDF at any time, right? And be able to put this on your print materials and things like that. I've got this formatted right now for a 4x6 label printer. We actually can print, it's kind of fun, labels of your labels. So that's kind of cool. Then you may end up finding kind of interesting ways to have fun with this kind of part of the system. But everything we produce is machine readable, right? You can kind of tell right away if you do this on something, if it's looking like an image, it's not really machine readable, right? AI tools are getting there where you can do that, but that's not the common definition of machine readability. Machine readability would be something that you can go in and actually look at and inspect, and you can see the markup, right, of what's in there. And that's what we end up presenting. So it works with everything. And what's kind of cool about that is you can run a browser translation tool and it will translate the label for you because it is machine readable.
Yeah,
Bailey?
and Bailey, I just a quick add-on anecdote to that. There's been some folks that have reached out to me and said, "Hey, what about this tool? We've looked at this tool to create labels." There are a lot of tools out there that do a just fine job creating a broadband label that is an image. That it looks like a label, it has all the information on it, but it is not machine readable. And so I implore those of you that are maybe looking at different tools to generate those labels, make sure that it is creating HTML markup, that it is creating this editable, inspectable, machine readable text. Otherwise, you wouldn't be meeting the requirement.
The FCC allows for different formats too. So if you are in that camp, you could have a CSV link to a CSV file, you know, down in the footer with your network and privacy policy, etc. Related to that, while Bailey, could you pull that up again, pretty please?
Yeah, sure thing.
Related to that, a question in the webinar chat about including privacy policy, network transparency statement, et cetera, you'll see there towards right above customer support on the label, there it is a requirement and there is a spot to link to your network management and privacy policy there. So that is.
Monica, let me add to that because Mike Becker emailed us this morning and also put it over here in the chat where he was talking about SLAs. Do we have to include SLAs? And so I was going to ask about that and wondering, would the SLA be in that same location you just mentioned if we had to add it?
Well, in hearing how I saw that email from you, Mike. Hello, Mike. The way Mike would put it, as I recall, was it's not part of the package. It's an optional add-on, and as such, wouldn't have to be on the label. I suppose you could put it there under maybe additional charges and terms, indicate it's optional and show the price. As an option.
But it could be a link, just like this read our policy. It could just be a link to where that goes.
That's true.
And
Yep.
Jenny was asking, what's an SLA? It's a service level agreement, Jenny. So those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's one of those where certainly like it's more B2B side of things. When they're paying a higher level of for service with you, you're guaranteeing a certain level of service. And there are repercussions that if you don't meet those, that the business customer can be assured of uptime and things like that. So that's what an SLA is. While I have the floor, I was also going to Dawn Bumgardner asked a question over here in the Q&A. Will technicians who go to people's homes to connect need to have label information to leave with customers, or is this covered when the customer fills it out at the beginning of the sales with the CSR? Certainly open to the rest of you guys to answer this question. The way I interpret this, though, is a customer's home is not considered a point of sale. And so it's not listed as one of those elements, which means, according to the FCC, at least now, that would not be a place where we would have to go through that information. However, if you do have material that has that, then the technician could be trained on that to be able to provide that to the consumer.
I would agree with Jeremy's interpretation, with the caveat that if that field tech is empowered to actually call in and upgrade that customer because they've decided to increase their speed, for example, that would be considered a point of sale moment. I don't know how many of your techs actually do that versus maybe socialize it with the customer, which would be considered marketing, and then the customer, you know, may or may not call in to do that. So a little bit of a gray area, but
Yeah, great point.
it wouldn't hurt for that's what our training makes really easy, is you can put everybody through it. And I think it would be wise, certainly anybody who's customer facing, it would be important for them to have at least a broad idea about what are broadband labels, why do they exist, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, good discussion. One thing I wanted to just mention in this, while I've got this one screen up in particular, is you're going to end up having changes. And being able to track history, of course, I picked an example that doesn't have any history, right? Which is perfect. But being able to track history, and I guess I don't have any examples of any history in these, is really important. Because again, this is a pretty critical thing. And, as you think about these and create these, whether you use us or someone different, definitely think about that kind of thing, because this will end up being basically part of your ongoing operations. And you need to be managing these labels as an important part of your business.
Yeah.
Can I put some color to a response that I typed into the Q&A, and it was related to labels. And if you're having a phone conversation with someone and Bailey's asking me questions about broadband, and I read the label to him at 7 o'clock in the morning. Later that day, Jeremy makes an update to the broadband label and says, we are no longer offering that plan at that price, or we've discontinued that line of service, whatever it might be. Someone needs to keep track of the fact that the label that was read at 7 o'clock in the morning is different than the label that started being read at 8 o'clock that evening. And so these systems, and again, CrowdFiber's tool does a great job of this, will give you that paper trail. So if somebody says, hey, I called and you told me I got it for XYZ, I want the XYZ plan, then you can very definitively say, you're correct, we had that conversation, that label was not archived until later that day, therefore you were read label A, as opposed to the following day or later that evening, you would have been read label B. It can be a lot to keep track of, and that's why having an automatic system, I mean, it's easy to archive a label, and it's just, you log into the system, and there's like, what, 2 clicks, I think, Bailey, and it automatically archives the label, timestamps when that label was archived, so you have a wonderful paper trail. And as you can imagine, if you have 7 or 8 labels that you're dealing with, that's a lot of things to keep track of.
Yeah.
I think related, I think that was the same question I was reading. Maybe it asked about, I'm not looking at it now, it asked about retaining information about labels being shared over the phone. If you read the initial order in November, it's 87 pages. Feel free. There are some interesting parts of it. But something it said in November got changed in August, and that relates to keeping track of information over the phone. Initially in the November document, it says that you literally have to document each occurrence. I talked to Jeremy Graves about these labels on this date. Well, the FCC rolled back from that for obvious reasons. Wouldn't that be cumbersome, for goodness sake? So now you have to have written documentation of what your business process is for sharing labels and alternative sales channels. And then, as you will recall from the top of the call, that's retail location, 30-party owned retail location over the phone, basically when you're selling in person. And so now you just have to have documentation of what's your process for showing those. You have a QR code, you have a flyer, whatever it is. And you have to train your staff on that, and you have to retain documentation of your training materials, which is why, shameless plug, but we spent a lot of time to make this easier for you, and that's what our on-demand course will be. You will be able to show the FCC if they come calling, remind yourselves as time goes on who's had the label training, prints a little certificate of completion. Also, there is a module you can customize with your business practices, so it's all bundled in one thing for you to take care of the documentation and training requirements of the order.
That wasn't shameless at all. That was shameful. But just so you guys know, that's the reason. So basically there are 4 elements to the training, right? 4 training modules, right? It's understand the order, understand the label, 2 parts on understanding the label, and then understand how do we have the conversation with customers. But the 5th element of that is how do you track specifically what are some of the nuances that you are doing yourselves? And so we've got that entire template kind of standardized, and then you can make it yourself. So to Monica's point, it's we were trying to help you fulfill that piece of it with little effort on your side.
That
Yeah.
sort of segues nicely, staying on this topic of training. Somebody asked in the registration questions, how often do you have to train after the initial training and onboarding of new employees? Are policy documents required for the record?
Yes, and actually I am blanking right now on how often that training has to occur. I'm assuming it has to every time, obviously every time you have a new staff member comes
Yeah.
through, right? They have to be. And then what we will be doing through part of our process is if the FCC order changes, then the initial training that we've created, we will go through an update and then we'll begin to push that out to you guys whenever those things occur.
To my knowledge, the last time I read, well, I don't believe the FCC has put how often training needs to happen. So for right now, I would interpret it as each person needs to be trained. So on October 10th, if that's your implementation date, anybody who is going to be selling service at a minimum, there may be reasons to educate more staff, would need to be trained. And then as you hire new people, they need to be trained. Now, could they go the way of like CP&I and require training every year or every 2 years? Quite possibly, but right now that isn't part of the order.
Which is strange because CP9 red flags you got to go through and do every year, right? Well, before March, I think is when everybody has to be trained. And so our team goes through and updates that based on any FC or CP9 red flag. So there's no reason why I wouldn't assume this would fall into the same type of category. But in my opinion, the FCC may be like, let's see what happens here um, before before we say what that's going to look like.
We've,
Um,
we've
we,
gotten,
we
oh,
I was
go
gonna
ahead.
say Casey Kruger. Hey Casey, how you doing? Says if we utilize QR codes in the office, do we still need to read through the label with the customer? So I think the FCC, what they want to do is to have it available for people to be able to pull it up and compare. But if they are in the office, then the label is saying the FCC is wanting you to read through the label with the customer. The QR
That's
code.
actually on the phone, Jeremy. If they're in the office, I think if they read that, that would suffice, but
I think that's I still think your staff should know how to go through it because your
oh,
customers are going to say, what
absolutely.
is it? What does this mean? Right? What does this latency mean? So,
Exactly.
but
And that's
you're
what our
reading the have
training,
to is not necessary, right?
right.
Yeah.
To Jeremy's point, that's your opportunity to use the label requirements as a way to help sell the service. You know, hold up the flyer, show your screen, talk about the high points, and use it to help close a sale. And the training does a nice job of putting this in a light of this is not a have to, the FCC made us. It's like shining the light on how it's going to help a consumer, not approaching the consumer like, well, I have to read you this label. Even if you might feel like that some days.
I think we have a lot of chat questions we still have yet to go
We
on.
do. I've got
I'm
one
feeling kind of
queued up
bad.
here.
Yeah.
Uh,
Travis, do you have a couple you want to answer? Or I've got a couple.
I've got at least
Yep.
one queued up
Go
here.
for it.
One from Linda
Yeah.
Lassen talking about, and I'll read the question. What does it mean that an ISP must provide the information in each label separately in a spreadsheet file format on their websites via a dedicated URL? I didn't see that in any of your samples. And so I'm going to do is, whoa, where did that go? I'm going to do a screen share here and show you what that looks like. The file here. Can you see my screen here?
Yep.
So this is an example of the machine readable URL that contains all of the plans. And I've downloaded this using the Broadband Consumer Labels tool by CrowdFiber. And so every time you add a label into this, all of the data associated with that label is in here, and it includes all the pricing, all of the terms, all of the things that are part of that label. This file is what they're talking about. This is a CSV file. Now, without getting too nerdy, when you open up a CSV file, it oftentimes opens as as an Excel spreadsheet. But this is the file that their tool automatically generates for you. So if you use a tool, if you use their tool or a tool similar that does the same thing, this is the file that you would need to have linked to for available on your website for folks to download and consume.
Hey, so there was one in here also. Tell me, did we get to the one from Marie at Hartelco where she was talking about one-time charges that are optional?
No.
Did we?
No, we haven't gotten to it.
All right, so Marie, thanks for the question. So for the one-time charges that are optional, do those need to be listed under one-time charges? Example, we will offer inside wire maintenance for a small fee each month, but it's optional. Or another example, we will sell routers if they don't have one. Can you guys talk about that one?
My read on that is that optional things do not need to be included. But what I will say is that what we found as we worked with people on labels is that you need a lot of wiggle room in these to sometimes describe all the things you want to describe. And it's why we have generally relaxed the constraints to put data into the label. So whereas you might think, oh, well, that field should only include a number. You know what? Unlimited might be the right answer. Or you might want to say this is an optional service, right? And mark it there. You know, the labels are mainly meant to help you make decisions. So, you know, an inside wiring option may not be critical for someone to compare things, right? But the system that we built would support those kinds of things. And I think there's some good work you can do with us, you know, as a group here and with yourselves, thinking about how you maximize what these labels can do for you, right? Because you may not want to just be thinking about this rigidly with what you need to do, but what will help people understand what you can offer. And so that's an important factor in this.
Really well said, Bailey. And I think a prime example is if you include managed Wi-Fi or the router or some level of equipment, I would absolutely want to find out a way to work that into the label as an optional additional charge with a zero, like a zero sum, or in a different area under description, but for all the reasons Bailey said.
Yeah, that's a great point. Another question we got was on I think promo pricing and introductory rates. The FCC has absolutely anticipated that those will be the case, and they want those disclosed. So, you know, in the app we built, for example, you check that, and when you check that, you describe that, you know, this is introductory rate for the first 12 months, right? And that the price will change after that. So, so you can make all those kinds of changes in the system, and they do expect you to disclose that kind of data.
We had a question down here from Anonymous. I don't know if you guys know Anonymous. We have a lot of Anonymous that have joined us today. Said, would it be an advantage to have competition labels compare at the point of sale? And so I was typing out my message and thought, oh, this is getting too long. So I want to address that. So it would be really, in my opinion, it would be like, yeah, take that. Well, ours beat yours. If ours beat yours, number one, right? So that would be kind of cool. Number two is, I think it's going to be hard enough keeping up with your own labels. Actually, we've made it pretty damn easy to keep up with your own labels, but keeping track of theirs and yours and side-by-side comparisons will be a pain in the butt. But even beyond that, I would say, if you haven't felt like it would be a competitive advantage to already be comparing your price and package to your competition that way, I don't know why you'd necessarily want to do that on the label side. But whoever you are, Anonymous, I like where your head's at.
Yeah, and to all the anonymouses and all of you of the world, it's so much easier to do competitive analysis now. So that should be, if you've got big providers in your areas that had to go compliant yesterday, it's time to update that competitive analysis.
Bingo.
Because now it's so much easier to get at that information. And if you're on retainer with us, you can ask your AE to do that for you.
Yeah. Hey, Marcy asked a question about something that's come up for me several times. And that has been making the unique identifiers. I don't think we've talked about that yet, but there are requirements around it. The first few digits, I think the first 10, if I recall, have to be your FRN. So that's an FCC license number. But then the next 15, and it's a lot of characters. It's 15 alphanumeric characters are ones for you to set. And so most companies we're working with are setting up some kind of rule for how to do that. we create IDs in the app, which you could use to append to if you wanted to, but it's probably not right. I think you actually need to be setting these on your own, is what I really would recommend. And it takes some thinking, usually from your product team and your IT team to think about how you want to start doing these, because it's going to be an ongoing thing that you'll need to maintain.
I've got another one that came in from our friend
Oh.
Anonymous. Do you have to make labels for long-standing customers, such as they've got our old, now unavailable service from 5 years ago, that have services that we no longer offer? The answer is no. So when we have October deadline arrives, the things that you are selling and promoting at that point in time are the items that need labels. If you have grandfathered in things, if you have old connections, old plans that you're no longer actively selling, then you don't need to have labels available for those. Now, there was a gray area question that came up in a conversation the other day, which was, yeah, we don't advertise it, but we do have this plan. If somebody's talking to us and they say, hey, these are all too expensive or it's just too much, then we have this sort of unwritten rule plan. It's like the only if you're talking to us on the phone plan. You're offering that. That's something that you're selling. You may not be trumpeting it out and blasting it all over social media or whatnot, but if it's something that you could actively add them as a customer with that unwritten rule plan, then you would need to have a label for that.
And that is similar answer. Somebody asked in registration about, business plans not being on a website. And, if you have business internet plans that you commonly offer, maybe you don't show them on your website, but you sell them, you talk about them in the retail location, you talk about them over the phone, they're offered to, more than one business. It's not a custom plan made for a special business situation. Then yes, you would need a label for those too. So a little clarification there. We're 5 minutes away, and there is a subject of questions that a couple people emailed about when they registered that I think we should get to. I'll read them. If we require phone service with our broadband service, are we still considered standalone broadband? Related question from somebody else. Just would like to confirm that we only need labels for broadband only. We don't need them for our phone and internet bundles. So if you require a phone line, most companies, I don't know who submitted these, most companies that do that still show broadband as if it were standalone, and it's the asterisk phone service required. You still need a label for that. Now, the second person asking about if it truly you're showing on the website, it's X dollars for this speed of internet and this type of phone service, that's a true bundle. And by the FCC definition, you wouldn't need a label, but careful there, my broadband friends, because most of the providers I spend time with and look at don't truly just sell broadband and phone as a one lump sum. They'll usually have that, and then they'll have a page that just talks about internet and what the internet price is. So I think we got through all the questions you submitted. So last chance, if you think we left your question out.
We got a couple more that came into Q&A just
Great.
now as well. We have an install fee, but waive it if they keep service for 6 months. How should we show this and the option to be waived?
Ooh.
Pull up your label, Bailey. Let's look at that. You've been dealing with some of these if ands. I bet you've got an idea.
So yeah, let's just look at this and think about it. So, one idea is, I think what I would do, honestly, there is probably look at, I might look at an early termination fee or a notice here that install is waived if 6 months or something. Again, that's kind of the nice thing about being able to type these things in. So let's just play with something real quick. Waived if subscribe for 6 months. Now that's kind of a disaster to type in that little thing, but let's take a look and see what that looks. Hey, there it is, right? So, so you could play with some things like that. Now, you also could say that this contract has a term, and you could have one that has a term of 6 months and gives you the free install, one that's month to month and doesn't come with the install. So there are usually multiple ways to do this. And you're happy to talk with you more to think about what you want to do.
Man, that's a solid solution that you just pulled right out of the hat right there. That's awesome.
Out of the hat. I'm glad you said the hat.
I went there.
Yeah, I was
Really
afraid
good-
where you were going
really
with
good
that.
cover.
No, the rabbit.
Hey
what-
guys, I know we're kind of at the end of our thing. A couple things we want to bring up as we get to a close here. I mean, I don't think there have been webinars that have been better attended or more highly attended than these types of things. So we know this is on your heart and your mind. So we're here to help. You can imagine how much interest there is going to be. So if you are interested in us helping you, not a sales pitch, reach out to us. That's why we got this early bird pricing so that you guys can get in early. You can imagine web teams and CrowdFiber's teams and our training teams are going to be pulled in a lot of directions. We want to support you and want to help you. So just call us and question us, talk to us. Let's get on the list so you're not last on the list. So do that sooner than later. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is for those of you who are members with CrowdFiber or clients of Pivot or NRTCs, Tech Connect is coming up here in about a month. And of course, we would love as many of you to come to that as possible. So it's in Texas, Horseshoe Bay, and May 14th through the 16th. Mr. Bailey and I will be presenting together, and there's going to be lots of topics. So if you haven't attended Tech Connect, we'd love for you to attend Tech Connect. So please put that on your radar screen. We would love to see you there, and we can continue these types of conversations, but lots of other conversations that will be had there as well. So just wanted to throw that in before we closed out. So Bailey, Monica, Travis, I'll turn it over to you guys to wrap us up.
We will be sending out an email with a recording link. We also have a checklist we'll share, and we'll provide the URLs, broadbandconsumerlabels.com, that you can go, you can check out the app from there. You can learn more about how we're helping with the website and other point of sale compliance, more about the training, etc. And we wish you the best of luck and encourage you to plan ahead just so that you have time for all those, how are we going to handle this scenarios? Because, you know, it will come up. It's just the nature of something new like this. So plan ahead, please. It'll make it easier for you and make it easier for those who are helping you.
Reach out to any of us, Bailey directly, any of us directly. Reach out at getinfo@askpivot.com. We can help you. Dawn's going to follow up with some information to you, but don't hesitate. We're here to help.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.